Okay, so this is our agenda for this session on building the business case. So we've got the most important bits first. We've got the two breaks scheduled at around 2:45 and 3:40. Chance to have a wee cup of tea, and there's a workshop activity planned for the middle of the session. And we're going to be planning today's session around three broad categories: community energy, so that's electricity projects, heat projects, and energy efficiency. And I'm going to look at some of the different business models for each of these categories. And then at the end, we're going to have a roundtable discussion, and that will be an opportunity to learn from each other. So I'm sure there's lots of experience in this call, and we can learn about people's experiences. So I'm joined from Scene by Ahmad and Sandy, and we'll be available for any questions at the end. But throughout the session, please feel free if you have any questions, either by raising a hand or put a message in the chat, and Ahmad will let me know if there's a question that needs answering. But yeah, please do ask questions as and when they come up. Okay, so before we get started, it'd be good to know a bit more about you and why you're attending today. So as I said, I'm aware some people have attended all the sessions, and so I've done this a few times. So please feel free to keep it brief, but it is useful for me to know kind of who's on the call. So I'll kind of go through in turn, and if you could let me know kind of your name, who you're representing, and what you want to get out of today's workshop. But no worries if you don't want to introduce yourself, but I'll just go through on the order that they are on the call. So Andrew Beresford.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I work for Community Action Northumberland, a charity in Northumberland. We do various things. I'm on the energy team. I'm a climate action officer. And the project I'm working on, funded by National Lottery, has an element of supporting community projects or community groups who want to, identify and move forwards towards a community energy project. So today is as much about continuing networking and also just expanding my knowledge base to be able to help people out there.
Great. And Carlton Smith.
Hello, I'm Carlton Smith. I work for Bradford Trident. We're a community anchor in Bradford. We're just developing a new site and planning to put a large solar array on that. So just want to double check I've covered all the bases and got the approach right, and if there's any other income or business model opportunities that I've missed.
Great. Fiona Steed. You wanting to introduce yourself, Fiona Steed? No problem if not.
Sorry, I don't think my microphone was on.
Okay.
Yes, I represent Talk with Community Energy. We've been a group of volunteers for about 12 months now, and we're embarking on energy generation using solar panels on community buildings. We're at the stage where we're just about to submit a funding application for stage 2 development stage. And we just want to make sure, like the previous person, that we're getting everything in the right order. So interested in this one particularly.
Great to see so many people on at kind of those future stages and kind of development stages. That's great. Helge Erdal.
Hi, I'm Helge Erdal. I'm with Otley 2030, and at the moment mainly focused on heat scheme, and we are in the process of putting together an application of the ERS scheme, the Energy Redress Scheme. So that's our main focus at the moment.
Okay. And Jake Lawrence. There's Jake Lawrence.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's actually defaulted to my old name. I'm Jake DeLacy now.
Okay.
I work for Community Action Northumberland as well. I'm the Community Buildings Energy Advisor. So I offer energy audits and energy advice to any community building within Northumberland. I'm here to learn as much as I possibly can so that moving forward I can help any community space that would like to apply for funding and things like that. Just build on the knowledge that I can give them the best support I can.
Great. Janine. from Whitley Bay.
Hello, everyone. Hi. My name is Janine. I work for Whitley Bay Big Local, which is a small community charity based in Whitley Bay. I'm the energy community coordinator, particularly looking after an innovation trial called Community DSO with Northern Power Grid. So we are one of the 4 trials in a current phase looking at community DSO, and that's my focus. I have a colleague who does the redress scheme funded project. So particularly we provide energy advice in the community across North Tyneside. And we have done so for a number of years, offering energy cafe opportunities every month to the community. And we are now at a stage where we are thinking how to build on that, how to provide an even better offering to the community in and across North Tyneside. Having said that, we don't have a current application or a clear set line of how to build on that portfolio, but have very much started to get our heads around of different legal, regulatory, as well as commercial information of how to go the next step.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Lucy Meredith.
Hiya. Yeah, I'm Lucy. I'm the coordinator for Leeds Community Energy. We're a relatively new group, and so I'm just wanting to expand my knowledge base really so that I can support the groups within Leeds. We're looking a lot at community buildings as well. Yeah, and just wanted to learn.
Great. Patrick Coyle.
Hi, afternoon. So I said this is my third session now, and they've all been very good. So looking forward to this one as well. I am a climate action officer for a charity in Yorkshire called Community First Yorkshire, and I'm working principally on a project called Village Green. And what we're going to be doing is working with communities across North Yorkshire to help them understand energy better, decarbonize community buildings, and also look at things like community energy projects. So I'm really, really interested in learning a lot about it, basically. So thank you very much.
Great. Russell Hall.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm Russell, representing Environmental Smart CIC, which is a North Yorkshire-based CIC set up to represent communities and basically get funding for feasibility projects, because a lot of the communities don't have an organisation to do that for them. We've got lots that have completed feasibility, mainly in heat networks, but moving into solar and possibly hydropower, and also others that we're applying for feasibility funding. But obviously, the next phase is development and commercial cases. So that's what I hope to get out of today's call.
Great. Sandy from Scene, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, yes I can. Sorry, caught me off guard there, Ross.
Sorry.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sandy. I think you've met me before in the various sessions if you've been here. If not, I'm a director at Scene. I will be sitting and listening in to Ross's great presentation with the commercial aspects, and then joining in to have some discussions when we get to the workshop elements. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. Susan Ross.
Hi everybody, my name is Susan Ross. I'm from Edge Innovation. We've supported a range of different community energy projects, some where we basically try and collaborate with other partners, including Community Action Northumberland and Durham Community Action, to try and support communities to be able to develop their energy projects. And we're really interested in where some of the barriers lie within that as well.
Cool. And finally, Walt.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, Walt Law, representing, I guess, York and Leeds Community Energy, where I'm a volunteer. Number of projects in different sort of states of blight. And what I'll get out of today's workshop is just continued enlightenment.
That's a high bar.
Yeah. I'm sure you can do it, Ross.
Ahmad, I realised I skipped over you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahmed. I believe I've met some of you before. I ran a previous workshop on the grid connection process. I'll be here listening along and helping out Ross in any way, and everyone else, of course.
Great. Okay, so I think that's everything, everyone. So let's. Oh, Kara's got a. Oh, did I miss out you, Kara? Have you joined late? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit late. Hey, nice to be here with everybody. I'm Cara Naden. I'm down in Somerset. Work for Somerset Council as a climate specialist, but I'm also involved in community energy and help develop some rooftop solar on schools and an industrial unit, but also the challenges of trying to deliver funded ground mounted solar has become quite paramount recently, as our planning permission was thrown out by the council in which the project is supporting. So they're slightly frustrated about that, but also to acknowledge how much renewables has gone forward with communities in particular, and how we can formulate in areas with local authorities trying to meet net zero, stronger relationships in order to deliver in partnership.
Great, thanks, Kara. Is there anyone else that joined late that would like to introduce themselves? Caroline?
Hi, I'm Caroline Greenwood. This is my my third session with you. I'm with the Upper Don Community Energy Group. I'm a relatively new member of the group, been with them about a year. And I'm just trying to, Upper Don is in the northern part of Sheffield area. And I'm just wanting to immerse myself in this area, personal interest and wanting to be better informed so that I can participate more fully in our group.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you.
Was there anyone else wants to introduce themselves, or is that everyone? I think that might be everyone. Okay. So I'm aware these introductory slides, some of you have been on quite a few of these workshops, so I'm gonna go through them quite quickly. So first of all, to introduce you to SEEM. So we are community and local energy specialists, and our mission really is to enable low carbon projects, with an emphasis on them being locally led, locally owned, locally managed, and that means we're really focused on any projects having a really positive impact for the local people, as well as it being low carbon. And we work across every stage of projects, so from initial feasibility studies or options appraisals through to kind of project development, developing business cases and project management. Okay, and so this series of workshops were funded by the North Eastern Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. They're one of 5 hubs in England, centrally funded by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. One of the main ways that the hub's supporting community energy is the Great British Energy Community Fund. So this is a really crucial funding opportunity that enables project development, either at stage 1, which is the feasibility stage, or at stage 2, which is more about project development. And then the hub's also got this program of capacity building initiatives, and this workshop, the Rep State, is an example of that. So yes, that community fund, the Great British Energy Community Fund, so it's open at the moment until 12th of November. So it's open to any proposals. I think there needs to be at least 50% community ownership. And yeah, as I said, that covers either the feasibility stage or project development. And here's the team at the hub. So it's Abby Rains that's been our point of contact for this workshop series. But yeah, if you've got any queries, there's that general inquiries email. And there's also more localized support if you want to contact your local officer. These are the people. Right, I think I did that in record time. So hopefully anyone that's seen that many times appreciated that. And let's kick off with the workshop. So yeah, so what are we covering today? So last year we ran a workshop on a similar topic, which some of you may have attended. So I'm going to start with a brief recap of some of those points. So that's looking at source of funding and ownership models. And then I'm going to kick on with looking at some business models, as I said, for these three broad categories of projects. So electricity, heat, and energy efficiency. So for each of these, I'm going to look at what the current commercial landscape is, outline some business models, and also present some case studies. And yeah, the workshop sessions will be an opportunity to give my voice a break and for you guys to talk through some of the core concepts, and we'll be kind of building a business plan together. Okay, so this is where we're at. The instructions are over. So let's kick off with a recap of the previous workshop. Okay, so first off, looking at different ownership models. So this slide summarizes what really the key considerations are for a community group at the outset of a project. So first off, what's the level of community involvement? And that's based on what do you need to achieve your objectives. So in some cases, less direct involvement might actually be ideal if you can still achieve those objectives. But typically, if you do want to retain, particularly if there's financial benefit, if you want to retain those benefits fully, and also make sure you're achieving your social outcomes and have that active decision making, you'll require a level of control. So secondly, what's the amount of capital required, so financial requirements? So this really impacts your ownership structure. So if you're able to raise the funds, perhaps via grants or a community share offer, you may be able to retain that control. But if not, entering into a partnership with an external body may be needed. So that enables the project, but does make perhaps dilutes that ownership. Thirdly, what's your risk tolerance? So how much of that kind of financial and operational responsibility are you willing to accept as a group? And their partnerships with external organizations are often really necessary, and that helps reduce your risk. Fourth is the complexity of the project. So particularly with groups running off volunteer efforts, do you actually have the capacity to operate this project? And if not, do you need to look for partners? And then finally is the long-term sustainability. So that's really just about choosing your ownership model that aligns with your long-term goals. So it's not just about getting the project off the ground. It's in year 10, year 15 of the project. If it is long-term, is this still going to be meeting our objectives? So we're going to look at these ownership models through this diagram. So this illustrates the kind of trade-off that you'll face between control and risk, and how that's reflected in different ownership models. So the diagram is going to move from top left to bottom right. So in the top left, the community takes on full control, but with that, it also takes on the risk. And then down to the bottom right, you've got your partners that are more in control, but they are the ones that are taking the risk. The community is no longer as exposed there. And broadly, we can think about this in kind of three categories. First being community ownership. Here, the community is retaining all of the benefits. And then there's a blended approach, which is a partnership, whether with the public or the private sector. And then there's partner-led, where that community group probably plays more of a supporting or a facilitating role. I'll go through a few examples. So I'm not going to go through each of these bullets. But yeah, starting at that top left, so entirely community funded, operated and owned. Here you're typically going to look at smaller projects. So perhaps a rooftop solar array on a community building. So if the community has the skills and resources to run this directly, you might be able to raise money via grants, and that means you have full decision-making power. But then as projects get a bit bigger and perhaps a bit more complex, you might need a contracting partner. So that's that second bullet. So here the community still does own the project, but is reliant on these specialist partners. So this might be a financial partner who helps you with a share raise, or a technical partner. I think there's one on the call that run a date that are doing energy advice sessions. So it might be that you need a technical partner to actually deliver those sessions. And then moving down to the middle bullet, the joint ventures. And there's differing levels of ownership here. So a core example of that might be a heat network scheme. So you really would need to partner either with a council or a developer for any kind of scale there, because those projects are kind of much larger and more complex. And there's kind of legal safeguards that you'd have to hit. Let's skip to the bottom. So partner ownership with community facilitation. So in this example, the community would have no ownership, but may well have some benefits that get channeled back. An example of that would be if a wind farm developer is providing a community benefit fund, that might be managed by the local community group. So the community group is facilitating the development despite not actually owning it. So the key point here is that just every model has a different balance of control, of risk, and of what the benefits are. And although your aim might be fully community owned, ceding that control can help get a project off the ground that otherwise wouldn't. Okay, so there's a lot of jargon, both in the energy world and the financial world. So we're going to go through a few key terms that you're probably going to encounter. First up is a power purchase agreement, a PPA. So this is simply a contract to buy or sell electricity at an agreed price, typically per kilowatt hour for a unit of energy, and that's to a defined customer. And the price that you get for that electricity that you're selling on is better if you can find a local customer, if you've got a PPA agreement with a local consumer. And the alternative is selling your energy back to the grid, where you get not as good a price, but it's still called a PPA. You've got a PPA agreement with the supplier. And this really is the core revenue stream for selling electricity. So the Smart Export Guarantee, so this is a government-backed initiative, and it's a rate that's paid to small-scale generators for the electricity that you are exporting to the grid. So think either a house that's got rooftop solar installed or a small building. This replaced the old system, which was called feed-in tariffs. Feed-in tariffs were fixed and guaranteed, a guaranteed rate. But these SEG, Smart Export Guarantee tariffs, are set by the suppliers, so they can change, and you'll have a different rate depending on what supplier you're with. Then a special purpose vehicle. So this is a separate legal entity that a community group may set up to own and run a project. So what this does is it shields the group from financial risk and makes it a bit easier to manage finance, contracts, operations, while keeping separate from the other activities that the community group may have. An energy services company called an ESCO. So this is particularly in the world of heat and energy efficiency, a company that would install, own and operate things like heat pump systems or energy efficiency improvements. And the typical ESCO model is that the building owner, so either the resident or the non-domestic organisation, wouldn't be paying for any of these measures up front. Instead, the energy services company is investing and is paid back the cost savings from people's energy bills. So thanks to that energy efficiency measure, someone's energy bill comes down and they're able to partially repay the upfront investments. So community ESCOs can use this model to help manage kind of retrofit or heat pump installation across many properties. Finally, an anchor load. So in heat or electricity, this is a large, reliable energy customer. So perhaps a school or a council building, a housing association, and their energy demand is quite stable, which means that you get more predictable revenue. And that makes it easier to get the project off the ground if you've got that anchor load, that main customer. Yeah, Fiona?
Sorry, Ross. So the special purpose vehicle and the energy services company, could they be a community benefit society?
Yes, I believe so. Yep.
That's fine. Thank you.
So let's move on to sources of funding. So this is another recap from the presentation last year. So this chart on the left, this kind of categorizes the four main sources of funding for community energy projects. And the higher up you go on this chart, the higher the interest rate or the associated costs are. And then the further to the right you go, the more financial risk that the community is taking on. So first up, the easiest example is the bottom left, grant funding. So this is free, so there's no interest payments. And there's very little or no financial risk, which means it's great for those kind of early stage or development costs. As I said earlier, the Great British Energy Community Fund is a good example of that. So it's typically small scale, the grant funding, but you can get larger scale grant funding for things like heat networks. So that would actually be covering your capital costs. Next up is the community share raise. Now this is the most popular form of community financing, and through a community share raise, local investors will become co-owners of the project, so actual members, and it's pretty democratic. So there's a one member, one vote system, which means it doesn't matter how many shares you've got one vote. And those investors will receive interest payments out of a share of the profits, and it's typically in the region of around 4 to 6%. But the important aspect here is that's not fixed. So that does reduce the financial risk for the community. So if you have to have a bad year, you're not obligated to be repaying the share interest to your members, to your investors. And then that other benefit of community share raise is it is typically local people that are investing in the project. So it does build that sense of community ownership, the buy-in, the engagement. Kind of local people are actually having a direct stake in the project, and that's important. So you need enough local engagement for people to be investing in your project, but it has proved really successful across like a wide range of projects, a wide range of types of communities, and that's why it's been so popular. So as you can see on the chart on the right, this shows what funding sources used for different types of projects. So most community projects that run to 1.5 million are funded with community share raises, but then when you get over 1.5 million, commercial loans are more typical. I didn't mention community bonds. So community bonds are another form of finance where it's local people that are having the opportunity to invest. But the main difference between this and a share raise is that the bondholders, your local bondholders, aren't members. They're not co-owners, and they get a fixed return. So this fixed return is good for the investors. They get more guarantees. But it does increase the financial risk for the project. So you have to build in that kind of extra risk buffer to make sure that even in a bad year, you've got enough reserves to be paying your community bondholders. So essentially it's a fixed interest loan, a community bond. But it does still encourage that sense of community participation, albeit with one that's more predictable returns for those investors. And finally, the commercial loan. So this is normally the last option. You would probably prefer the other options as a community, because with a commercial loan, you have that obligation to pay according to a fixed repayment schedule. And then the interest rate you're paying is typically going to be higher, kind of from around 7 or 8% or more, depending on the risk. So again, like to go out for a commercial loan, you really have to make sure you've got the sufficient cash flows for that to actually make sense, and that risk buffer needs to be built in. So although I've presented these as separate, you can combine them. Particularly combining grant funding with community share raise is a very good way to go. Particularly grant funding for the early stage costs, and then community share raise for your actual capital investment. So that in a nutshell is the sources of funding. Okay, so let's look at some more financial terms, some more jargon. So these are kind of the metrics that you might judge a project by, or you might see projects be terms that you might see be bandied about kind of financial health of a project. So net income is the simplest. This is simply the profits in cash terms. So it's the revenue minus the costs, and then the community benefit. So that's the proportion of this net income that's then going to be reinvested back into the community, so by the community group to fund other social projects, such as to alleviate fuel poverty or perhaps other sustainability projects. If the project is fully community owned, that share of net income that's community benefit is 100%. So you're going to be able to reinvest all of your net income eventually into community benefits. But when there's shared ownership, the proportion that goes to community benefit is going to be negotiated in advance. Net present value. So this value accounts not just for the total income of the project, but when during the project lifetime it happened. So it's about the timing of when you get your income, not just the total. And as an easy way to think about this, if I offered you either £1,000 tomorrow or £1,000 in 10 years' time, you are going to want the £1,000 tomorrow because that's much more valuable. You could invest it and earn more in 10 years' time. And the converse also true. Obviously, the £1,000 in 10 years' time is actually worth less than it is today because of inflation. So what the NPV does, the net present value, is it shows you what the value is, taking into account the opportunity costs. So what else could you have done with that money at the various times during the project? And all you need from your NPV is for it to be positive, a positive number, because this means you're getting more value than what the opportunity cost was. So the internal rate of return, this is a measure of a project's profitability in percentage terms. And again, like NPV, it accounts for when in the project lifetime your cash flows are occurring. And what this does is it enables you to compare projects that might have very different timings of when you're getting your income. But with the IRR, you're able to compare it like from like. Finally, the break-even year. So this is when your net income surpasses all your costs. So when you start making money on your initial investment. So as an example, for one of the lowest break-even times is for LED lighting or efficient lighting. Like within a few months, you've made your money back through energy bill savings. And with other projects such as kind of solar or electricity generation, you're looking at more than 7 years kind of time frames. Okay, so these are some more terms. We've got those out of the way. Let's move on to our first category of community energy projects, and that's electricity. So let's look at building the business case for generation projects. So let's first look at the landscape, so the policy and regulatory context. Something that's in one slide was a challenge. There are many things I could have included here, but these are some of the core ones that you may want to be aware of when you're building a business case. So first up is the National Planning Policy Framework. So this sets out the national priorities and provides guidance for local planning decisions. So what it does encourage local authorities now to support renewable energy in their planning policies, as long as any kind of impacts are acceptable. And then moving on to the local power plan. So this is the UK government's new national programme that's going to scale up community and local authority led clean energy. So their ambition is up to 8 gigawatts of new locally owned renewables, which is pretty massive. So it's set to be delivered by the Great British Energy Company that's been newly set up. Much of this is unknown. So the actual details of what's going to happen, the policy framework, what the actual funding mechanisms are going to be, we don't know yet. But at the moment, it does seem like the early emphasis is on more about projects that are led by local authorities rather than community groups, and kind of shared ownership opportunities. But it is very much a case of watch this space. So there may well be new announcements of tangible things that come out of the local power plan. Onto planning regulations. So that's planning regulations by the local authorities. So small-scale rooftop solar, particularly on a house, is classed as permitted development. So that means it doesn't require planning consent. That's provided it's not a listed building, and there are also different rules for conservation areas, but it's classed as permitted development. Beyond that, you will need planning permission. And at the early stages of project development, you want to be seeking some pre-application advice from the local authority. So what that does is it will flag any potential issues or potential impacts that might be of concern. And it means you can either address them, or if they're too big, it means you haven't got too far along the development process. And for worth mentioning here as well, for England, for a period of time, there was a de facto ban on wind, onshore wind, but that's now back on equal footing with any other form of renewable energy. Finally, on to grid connection. So this was the subject of Ahmad's workshop, so I'm not going to go into too much. So Northern Power Grid are the distribution operator in the northeast. And so what a project would do would request a budget estimate from them, again at the feasibility stage likely, and then Northern Power Grid will provide a budget estimate based on what the capacity is of that local network, whether there's any reinforcement needs, and this can really make or break a project. So we've seen some promising schemes that have got a quote of a budget in the millions of pounds and a queue of 10 years. And that just means the project isn't viable, or you've had to look for another way of doing things. In some cases, if grid connection costs are a constraint, you can look at limiting the amount of energy that you're exporting to the grid, so looking for the local customers. So yeah, grid connection is a core cost and something that needs to be worked out along with planning in the early stages of development. Okay, so let's look at some of the enablers and barriers to getting a community electricity generation project off the ground. So I'm going to, rather than take these as two separate lists, I'm going to talk through them as kind of connected pairs. And first up, the first enabler is declining technology costs. So as many of you will be aware, we've seen quite amazing reductions over the last decades, and that's making projects much more affordable. However, that barrier is that grid connection costs can be quite significant. They can be quite a significant portion of your upfront capital costs. So that doesn't increase the amount of investment that you'll then need to raise. I shouldn't be too down on grid connection costs, because sometimes the costs are very low. Then it's not always a barrier, but it's something that's always worth knowing. The number 2 enabler is all the available roof space. So that's particularly for rooftop solar PV, which is really one of the most attractive technologies. So whether that's in your city or your town, whether it's on community-owned buildings or kind of nearby non-domestic roofs or housing associations, there's likely that there is available roof space in your area, but that could be an area that the community energy group could explore. However, the corresponding barrier here, number 2, is that scale really matters. So what scale does, the bigger your development, it reduces your installation costs kind of per kilowatt. And what scale does is it helps to reduce those development costs, or kind of helps absorb the development costs to help get a project off the ground. So if you're looking at a community share raise, for example, you're looking at least £150,000, probably more than £200,000 for your project to be able to absorb those costs of running a share raise. So that's one of the barriers. Is yes, there might be available roof space, but can you get a project at scale to be able to develop it? Number 3 enabler is the matching of local supply and local demand. So if you find a local customer, a local consumer for your energy project, that leads to the highest revenue compared to exporting to the grid. But then on the flip side, number 3, if you are exporting energy to the grid, the revenue is a bit more uncertain. So if you've got an export PPA, a power purchase agreement with a supplier, those contracts normally last only about 1 to 3 years. So that means that your long-term income is a bit less predictable if you're relying on export as your main revenue stream. Number 4 enabler is support of policy changes. So there are kind of several regulatory changes that may be opening up new opportunities. An example of that might be energy clubs. And in general, policy is slowly, too slowly, but it is moving in the right direction. Then the corresponding barrier is the project complexity. So especially if you're looking at some of these more innovative projects like an energy club that policy is supporting, these are quite complex. And in general, energy projects can be difficult to manage. You may have multiple stakeholders, multiple contracts, and that is a barrier for a community group. The number 5 enabler is energy as a system. So what energy as a system means is it's treating renewable energy not just as one thing, but as part of an integrated system. So by combining it with battery storage, perhaps a heat pump or a local heat network, EV chargers. So what this does, treating it as a system, does increase your revenue streams and reduces the amount of energy that you might have to export. However, the barrier is planning delays, especially the more energy vectors you've got, the more planning permission you need. And that can make things kind of a bit more complicated and slow. Final enabler, and I think this is the biggest enabler for community energy, what sets it apart, is you have that buy-in and engagement from local people. It helps to get your project off the ground for raising finance, but also just helps you achieve some positive local impact, and is the reason for being. It's the reason the project exists in the first place. However, that final barrier, number 6, community capacity, is also the biggest one. So most projects are relying on volunteer effort, especially at first. And so do you have the capacity in your community is always one of the major questions at the beginning of a project. Okay, so those are the enablers and barriers. Now we're going to look at some example business models using some flowcharts. This may look complicated, but I'll try and talk you through it. And hopefully it's simpler than it looks. So this first example, I've called it self-consumption. It's basically a rooftop solar array being installed on a community-owned building. So let's start with the grey arrows. So that's ownership. So the community owns the rooftop array. Next move to the blue. So this is the flow of electricity. So the electricity is used on site. Any excess is then exported to the grid. Next, the financial flows. So for a small scale scheme, you may well have got grant funding. And then the main benefit for the organisation is these electricity bill savings. And then the electricity supplier, getting the electricity from the grid, is then providing you with a revenue stream for any kind of excess energy that you've had to export. So this model isn't generating you any revenue, or little revenue anyway, from exporting to the grid. It's primarily about energy bill savings. So let's build on this and see what a community can do to generate some extra revenue. Okay, so this is a much larger scale project. So here we have the model for a large scale renewable development. So this might be wind turbine on a private land or a farm. And the business model here is purely about exporting energy to the national grid. So you're large enough that your sole revenue stream is just about exporting to the grid. Let's start with the grey arrows. This is a big enough project that you may need a special purpose vehicle that is owned by the community organisation. And then that SPV is then owning the wind turbine or the solar array or whatever it is. And then the landowner still owns their land, obviously, but they are leasing use of it to the community energy company. The blue electricity flows, obviously very straightforward, exporting it all to the grid, which a PPA supplier, through a process called sleeving, which I don't need to go into, is then selling that electricity on to the wider market for you. The red financial flows, so starting perhaps top left, so this would be best operated perhaps with a community share raise, and those investors would be getting a return out of the project profits. And then that revenue is coming from the PPA supplier through a PPA contract. At the moment, that's in the region of about 9 pence per kilowatt hour, so it's fairly low. But if you've got the scale of project, that can be viable. I think that's covered everything on that slide. So the last thing is just to say that revenue isn't the biggest. So kind of next, we might want to think about what else can we add in to generate some more revenue and maybe feed more profits back into that community benefit fund. Okay, so here we've got again, this looks complicated. Actually, not much has changed here. All I've added in is this local consumer. We've added in a local supply opportunity. So this might be a supermarket, a school, a local industrial building. And with that physical connection to a local consumer, you're able to increase your revenue. So first, these blue electricity flows. So you can see the first point of call for the electricity is to supply you via this private cable, private wire, to supply your local building. And then as before, any excess energy is exported to the grid. Moving on to the red financial flows. So everything is the same as before. But now a separate PPA contract is going to be arranged between the local consumer and the project itself. So you can see that this revenue is likely to be quite a bit higher than your export revenue, kind of anywhere from 12p or even up to 20p per kilowatt hour. But the important thing is here that this rate has to be set at something that's beneficial for both parties. So the local consumer has to really clearly benefit from electricity bill savings, getting a lower price of electricity than they're currently paying, and then the project itself has to be gaining enough profits that they can reinvest that back into their community benefit fund. There could also be, sorry, I've lost my mouse. There could also be a scenario where the landowner and the local consumer are one and the same thing. So in that case, it might be a building that's leasing you their roof space, but then also is the off-taker is taking the electricity from the scheme. So are there any other ways to generate revenue? So perhaps if you don't have that local consumer. So the next model is looking at incorporating charging stations for electric vehicles. So in this example, you probably do that with a solar canopy in a community-owned car park. So you may have seen these kind of canopies, particularly in large car parks. They cover the parking space and charge the and power the EV chargers, but often in association with a battery to maximize the revenue. And then you can see here the revenue from those chargers is much higher than any other revenue that you're likely to get. So typical charging rates are at least 50 pence per kilowatt hour. So a charge point operator would take a cut of that for you, but you're still left with quite a good revenue stream. However, the reason that these aren't all the rage, the major drawback is your investment costs. So it's around 3 to 4 times more expensive a solar canopy compared to simply putting solar on a roof, because you're having to construct this big canopy. So there's quite big construction costs associated. But it can be a suitable business model still, especially if you've got that local hub, that local opportunity for vehicles to be charging. Okay, finally, let's look at the most innovative model that you could do. So this is an energy club, and I'm not going to talk through all the flows. You don't have to be paying too much into these flows if you're not interested in an energy club model. That's fine. But typically what an energy club does is, instead of the traditional way of if you want a local consumer, you need to have a physical connection, an actual private wire. But a new business model is emerging thanks to some regulatory changes from Ofgem. That's called P441 and P442 to any of the nerds out there. That means that you don't have to have a physical connection to be able to supply electricity to a local consumer. So here in this model, the community would own renewable energy across a number of different buildings or areas of land. And then they'd sell that to members of the local energy club. So those members could be residents, they could be businesses. And again, this benefits everyone. So the local people that are members would get reduced bills. They'd be able to buy electricity at a lower rate than they can anywhere else. And for the community group, you're able to sell your energy to these customers at a higher price than you can get from exporting. So this is still at the innovation stage, and it's pretty complex, kind of legally as well as operationally. You'd need a supportive electricity supplier, and that supplier would have to handle all the supply and all of the billing for the club members. But we do know that there are some suppliers that are interested in this. They're kind of examining it, looking at pilot schemes. So I think in the future, this could be a business model that could be viable for a lot of groups. Probably not yet, unless you're at an advanced stage and you're wanting an innovation project. But I think the energy club is a concept to be aware of for the future. Okay, so only 5 minutes late. That's not too bad. Let's break now. After all those flow charts filling our brains, I think probably we all need a cup of tea. So let's have a break and come back at 3 p.m. So we'll be back at 3 p.m. Okay. Perhaps before we start up again, is there anyone that has any questions on that first section on electricity generation? There will be a chance to ask kind of more extended questions and anything about your particular project later on, but any particular points that you'd like to raise, please feel free. Okay, so let's move on to the next part of this presentation, and that's looking at the 5-case business model and a case study. Okay, so when a project is seeking funding, whether that is from a grant, community investors, or public funding, the question you've got to answer really is, why should anyone back this project? So what the Treasury 5-case model is a framework for answering that question. Now, it's quite a rigid format. So it's used when applying for public sector funding, and you shouldn't necessarily directly recreate it when you're applying for funding from other sources. But as a general framework, I think it's really helpful to think through the business case of your project. So what this 5-case model does is it says that every project needs to prove, first of all, the strategic case. So is it strategically needed? So you've got to make the case for change. Like, does it tackle fuel poverty? Are you cutting bills? Does your project align with a particular national or local policy? Second of all is the economic case. So is it economically valued? Now here they take quite a broad definition of what economic value is. So this incorporates a kind of comparison of different options. So have you explored alternative options? Why is this option the best? And then also looking at, is there a wider social value? What's the environmental value? How are other local people going to benefit? So that's the economic case you've got to make. Thirdly is the commercial case. So this is more about what the business model is. Is this actually going to work in practice? Incorporated in this is the ownership structure, and kind of accounting for any risks. Fourth of all is the financial case. Like, is this actually financially sound? Have you proved that you've got healthy cash flows? What's your source of funding going to be? Is there a positive net present value, for example? Fifth is the management case. So is this going to be well managed? Do you have an appropriate governance structure worked out? Is there any kind of monitoring and evaluation kind of set up? What's the long-term management of this project? So this is all quite conceptual. So I'm going to look at this in practice with a case study. So that case study is the Dundee Renewable Energy Society. This is a 2.6 megawatt completely community-owned solar array in Dundee. Now, seen project managed this project, this array, and it was built on land owned by the James Hutton Institute, and they were also the energy customer. So this is that example I was looking at earlier where the landowner and your energy consumer are the same entity. So this kind of generation, it generates renewable energy for the Institute, and that's via a PPA contract. And it helps the Institute achieve their green energy goals. So it helps them become more sustainable, as well as reducing their energy bills. And then the final benefit is expected to generate around £1.4 million for the local community to be reinvested in the community. So this is going to be spent on local projects over the course of the 25 years. So we're going to look at each of the 5 cases in turn and see how that fits with this example. Okay, so first of all, the strategic case. So the Dundee Renewable Energy Society had some core goals, and that was to promote sustainability and also to alleviate fuel poverty. And what this project does is support those goals by not only that direct impact on local carbon emissions, which it's obviously doing, but that community benefit fund is going to enable the society to reduce fuel poverty and make those positive social impacts. There's also then the alignment with the James Hutton Institute, the JHI. So they have a target to achieve net zero emissions by 2035. And so you can see that between the two organisations, there's now there's an alignment of goals. You can see the strategy of why these two organisations have partnered So the economic case. So how did we prove that it was economically valuable? As with a lot of projects, this started with a feasibility study that got grant funding. And what this did was it tested lots of different sizes of arrays, lots of different scenarios, and the clearest economic benefit came from that local supply of electricity to the institute, and in a sizing that meant that most of the energy is used by the institute. So 94% of generation is going to be consumed. And what we could see earlier is what that means is that really maximizing the revenue. That kind of local consumer is able to pay a higher price for electricity than if you export it. However, on the cost and benefits in this economic case, there was limited grid capacity, and that meant that export is constrained. So we can only export to the grid up to a maximum level of power. And then that was part of why the array was sized how it was. So this economic value also takes account that there's profit sharing. So there's 50-50 profit sharing between the two organizations. So there's clear benefit for both parties. And then obviously social value, that social environmental value is a core part of the economic case. And that community benefit fund that Dundee set up will be supporting local people in fuel poverty. So that's the economic case. So it passed the economic case. Onto the commercial case. So the delivery model, as I said, is a long-term local supply model. So the Institute agreed to lease the land to the Renewable Energy Society and buy electricity, and that was under a 25-year contract. And that contract, as it often is actually with a local consumer, it's indexed to inflation. So that means you've got predictable revenues across the lifetime of the project. Sustainable procurement is another important aspect of the commercial case. And I believe that one of the workshops covered procurement. And then the risks is another important aspect of the commercial case. So the key risk here is that you're really reliant on one single customer. And therefore, in the commercial case, we identified some potential alternative customers. But this is one of the main risks of this project. So the financial case, so the project cost 3.4 million, and this was raised through a community share offer with an expected around 6% return for investors. And then those profits are split, as I said, between the two parties, giving an income of 1.4 million for the community. So is it going to be well managed? Well, the management case is it's set up as a community benefits society. So what this means is the project is owned and managed for the benefit of the community on that one member, one vote system. So it's democratic. And then you've got to decide kind of how are you going to elect your board. So it's partially elected by its members, and there's also kind of the annual AGMs, which means it's passing the management case. Okay, so that's the kind of run through of what it looks like in a nutshell to be putting together this 5-case business model. So we're going to move on to the workshop activity. And really kind of try and put this concept into practice. So I believe as there's, how many of us are there? I think there's 13 of us, so we should probably split into 2 breakout rooms. And what I'm going to ask these breakout rooms to do is think about the process of building a business case. So first up, I'd like each group to pick an energy generation scenario. So these are the opportunities that you might have to build a business case for. So there's either a 100 kilowatt rooftop solar, so that'll be on a large local business building, or with the support of a local landowner, you've got an opportunity for a large solar farm or a 1 megawatt wind turbine, or a couple of wind turbines that are 1 megawatt. So these first 2 are on premises that aren't owned by the community. So the third option is a solar canopy with chargers at a community hall car park. So this would be owned by the community. In your groups, you can either focus on just one of these, or if you have time, you can go through more than one. And what I'd like us to do is build up that business case, go through each case. So obviously, first of all, what's the strategic need? Why might this be useful in your local community? Secondly, where's the economic value coming from? What would be all the alternatives? Is there a better option? Thirdly, that commercial case. What's your business model? Where are you going to get revenue from? Will you need project partners? What the risks are? Finally, the financial case. So what's the best source of funding? And do you think what you've outlined is going to be able to make profit? So you'll see I've left off the management case because we've kind of, I think, talked about management in some other workshops. So we're just going to focus on these first 4 cases. So we'll do that for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll come back together as a group. And I'd like us to talk through the scenarios in a kind of green light, red flag format. So what are the key strengths? What are the strongest reasons for supporting the project? And then the red flags, so kind of think about what are the challenges? What do we need to overcome here? So I believe, Ahmed, I'll hand over to you to make the breakout rooms if no one's got any questions about this activity. So I think it'll be run by me in one room and Sandy in the other.
Do we have everyone back in the room, Ahmed?
Say again, Sandy.
Do we have everyone back in the room?
We should. I think a couple more people waiting on. Not sure if Ross is.
Having an issue getting back into the main room. We'll give it a little minute and see.
Yeah.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. Cool. Not sure if I heard that right. Are we waiting for anyone that's struggling to get back in?
No, we managed to get back in. I think we just beat you by 30 seconds or so.
Okay,
Go
cool.
ahead.
Yeah, so let's maybe kind of any volunteer to summarize what they talked about, particularly first of all through the prism of the green light, sort of the key strengths of the opportunity that you were talking through. So open this up to anyone.
I can maybe give a summary from what we talked about in our room. I did a terrible job of time management, and we got through the first 2 points in detail, so strategic and economic, and a little bit on the commercial. And we didn't come to a green light decision, but we did look at so option C, 25 kilowatt solar canopy at Community Hall car park. We overlaid a couple of additional assumptions that we had some EV charging, and that we might have some battery storage to make it work for the Community Hall. The strategic was relatively straightforward. It was about solving, providing power to the Community Hall and helping reduce costs at the hall itself. It was providing resilience from power cuts. So that was our battery storage aspect. We also assumed it was rural, so required resilience from power cuts. We noted that it's quite a high margin way to make money. If you're EV charging, you can charge a reasonable amount, and it makes quite a lot of economic sense. And it also has these kind of additional benefits of things like solving issues with on-street parking, on-street charging, and so forth. So, sorry, I forget names, but someone on the group raised the point that, in a community they were aware of, the local petrol station had turned down EVs. The community were, effectively forced to, but strategically decided to install their own chargers. So it's kind of providing a service, as well as benefiting the hall. On the economic case, we had a huge number of benefits. I will touch on a few of them, but I thought an interesting way to put it was turning dead space into an economic opportunity. So presuming there's no charge for the car park, it is just space that's being used for people to use the hall and so forth. You can turn this into something that generates revenue. With that, you'll potentially promote EV uptake in the area. Associated to that, you might be improving air quality as people move to electric vehicles. Generally, you would be finding it easier to attract people to events and that kind of thing if they have an EV. Potentially attracting new businesses and retail to the area, as there's kind of a place to park and a place to charge your car. It would open up things like car share opportunities. It would potentially open up things like heat decarbonization in the hall itself, so using the solar to, say, power a heat pump. And then has these kind of social aspect benefits of, providing a progress towards net zero in the community, acting as, retaining the community hall as a community asset. So cutting their costs means they continue to operate. And then the last one raised was around community cohesion. So having a kind of central project to the community for people to rally around. So we had quite a good discussion on that, and there was clearly an economic case to do so, as well as environmental and social. And then lastly, on the commercial case, we got through a little bit of ownership discussion. So whether we would want it to be 100% community, whether a partner is needed to get the funding in the door, to get the finance in the door to do this. or whether we'd actually look at a special purpose vehicle, or look at another entity to own this and manage it, just to kind of separate that from the community itself. And then the last point raised was, what's the charging model for this sort of thing? With a revenue source, as we're talking about, who benefits? Does the money come, do you make a good profit and the community hall makes money off it, or the community organization makes money off it? Or do you charge a low amount to your EV users and so forth, and they benefit? So that was a discussion point we didn't get to have.
It's a great summary. Sounds really good. Yeah, does anyone from my group want to? So we looked at the rooftop solar on a large local business building.
Ross, maybe after I've just summarised that, I wonder if anyone from my room has a feeling on whether they would red flag or green light this, whether they think it's a good idea, or having not got into the risks.
Yeah, I think we were probably all headed in the direction of green light. We were coming up with a lot more benefits than costs or disadvantages. I also think actually interesting. Andrew just thumbs up. I mean, Andrew had a point about it. If this was in a rural area, then there's something about resilience here as well, having a power source, and that would open up funding sources as well. So I think we probably would have got to a green light.
What were some of the challenges that you think you might need to overcome with a project like this?
Well, I suppose raising the revenue that you would need to run it, and getting, it wouldn't be cheap. So yeah, the money's always one of the big challenges, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if it's a smaller location, then would there be enough EV customers to gain much income from it?
Yeah.
And I suppose you've also got to ensure that we've made assumptions it can happen, but there could well be permissions required. You don't know what the local connections are like. So yeah, there's a lot of wonderful positive assumptions, but the reality of this may be very, very different.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other thoughts on this kind of scenario C, whether in that breakout room or whether from my one? No. Okay, so I mean, our breakout room focused on scenario A, so it's the 100 kilowatt rooftop solar. So we assumed this would be. We talked about that potentially being in an industrial estate or an industrial building. We kind of focused right in on the commercial case. Kind of quite a lot of our discussion was about what's the business model, and quite a lot on risks. So we were assuming that there's a good energy demand from that local building, and they would be the main energy customer. But we were seeing a lot of risks. So several in our breakout room, I've had quite a lot of, or I've had some experience with kind of roofs not being suitable. So that's a core risk. What happens when there's leaks and there's maintenance issues in some older roofs. Also the risk of you relying on this one energy consumer. What happens if they reduce their energy demand or if they move away? Kind of concerns with some of this complexity when you're relying so much on this outside partner. We're also discussing a bit about how the buildings themselves are owned and how they're managed. In quite a lot of industrial estates, there are kind of there's an owner of all the buildings, and then they're leasing them out to individual companies. So there might be reluctance for an individual building that is leasing their space to take part in the scheme. How are they benefiting? Is the decision-making power being taken away from them? So we discussed a few issues like that. Does anyone else in my group want to maybe summarize some of the other things that we talked about? or maybe focus in on what are we giving this, the green light or the red flag?
If I can leap in again, I'm on the fence at the moment because my organization would like to move in that direction. And the risks and the complexity is such that we are having to put a lot of work into this. Just getting the system connected to the grid, where we're in a region where the grid is quite low energy. It's, we don't have much in the way of just plugging in locally. So we're on the fence.
Yeah.
We're going to work at it.
Great. Cara?
I would say more likely to support, particularly where we've got good demand profile. That makes a good business case, but it's understanding the long-term security, as we discussed, some of these contracts for several decades, and we can't guarantee the business will still remain there during that time. Kind of weighing that up. But in terms of community investment, certainly down south, we've had a very strong support. Lots of people want to do social investment, not because the return's good, but it is a very ethically positive thing to do. And with the requirements to decarbonise energy, again, on that kind of term currently, certainly politically there is support. So I guess it's just about the long-term time frame that needs to be looked at in more detail.
Yep. Anyone else have anything to share or their thoughts on this? Yeah, so it sounds like we've got a green light for the solar canopy, albeit with a few assumptions penciled in there, and a kind of tentative green light for the rooftop solar, albeit understanding that there's a wee bit of complexity there. There's some relationships to manage, lots of stakeholders, and yeah, I think we're right to be thinking of long term. Kind of what's this going to look like in the long term? Your energy project. It's not just about is it going to work now. So I think that's the end of that first workshop, unless anything else, anyone else has anything to add. So let's have another little break and come back to look at heat and energy efficiency at 3:50, 10 to 4, 10 minutes time. Thanks all. Okay, welcome back everyone. Got a nice little break. So we're going to be moving on to looking next up at the business case for community heat. Maybe Ahmed, I could just get a thumbs up from you first to just make sure that you can hear me okay. Great. So, community heat. Sorry, I think I've got a hand raised. Is there another question?
No, sorry, I was trying to do a thumbs up.
Okay, great. Okay, so as with electricity generation, we're going to start up by looking at the policy and regulatory context for heat supply. Again, this is just a snapshot of some of the core things to be aware of. So the heat and building strategy. So this was UK legislation from 2021, and it sets binding targets to decarbonise homes and workplaces. So this includes phasing out of natural gas boilers by 2035. And there's also an extremely ambitious target of, I think, 600,000 heat pump installations per year by 2028. So only 2 years away from that now. At the moment, we're only about 60,000 per year, so about 10% of that. But that's the overall targets of the heat and building strategy that's setting the agenda. So the heat network zoning program. So this is setting pilot zones where it's been deemed that heat networks could be most effective. So they're effective either because of, or both because of, there's a good heat resource in the ground, and also there's a good cluster of buildings and a demand. So in these heat network zones, some buildings may be required to connect to heat networks by a certain deadline, and these zoning regulations are kind of varying by region. I understand that there are heat network zones, so kind of areas that they expect heat networks to be successful. So these are in Newcastle, Gateshead, Sunderland, Hull, Leeds, and Sheffield. So these are the ones that, as far as I can tell, that these are the ones that are in the North East and Yorkshire area. So these heat network zones, they're primarily about public-private delivery, either solely public or some kind of combination of the two. But there may still be a role for communities in these heat network zones. So either as advocates to ensure that these schemes are actually affordable for residents. And if that is the case, communities can help with the buy-in to help persuade people that this is an effective form of heating. So the boiler upgrade scheme is next up. So this is a heat pump grant of £7,500. And what this does is basically remove the cost discrepancy that there otherwise is between installing a heat pump and installing a gas boiler. So particularly for small heat pumps, this really makes a massive difference and can in some cases cover all of the cost. But yeah, it reduces that cost barrier for people to be installing an air source heat pump. Finally, the Future Homes Standard. So again, this isn't coming into force yet, but it will do soon. And so this is likely to include legislation that all new build homes need to use low carbon heating systems and solar panels wherever it's possible. And this standard's also introducing energy efficiency minimums for new builds. So again, let's now go through the general enablers and barriers for getting a community heat projects off the ground. So this is either a communal system, so a heat network, or a communally owned source of heat that will supply to many, or it could be an individual system. So it could be an individual dwelling installing a heat pump. So the first enabler is the grants and funding. So as I said, the boiler upgrade scheme is great for households, and for heat network projects, you can get kind of up to 50% public grant funding. However, the corresponding barrier, the barrier number one, is that these grants are necessary, and we see them in heat because it's an expensive thing to install. So there's quite high capital expenditure, CapEx. This is different from electricity generation, where those renewable technologies are cheaper than the fossil fuel activities. But installing a low carbon system is often more expensive than the fossil fuel equivalent. The number two enabler is the efficiency gains from electrified systems such as heat pumps. So heat pumps use a lot less energy than a boiler to deliver the same amount of heat. So it's about 4 times less energy than fossil fuel boilers, and that's because you're using your power only to transfer the heat from the outside air or ground into your building. So unlike fossil fuels, you're not actually getting the heat from the combustion. So this means that heat delivery is really efficient. About 4 times more efficient. However, the corresponding barrier is what's called the spark gap, and this is that electricity is about 4 times more expensive than fossil fuels at the moment. So you can see that this completely undoes, or almost completely undoes, the difference, undoes the efficiency gains that you're getting from an SOS heat pump. So this spark gap is a major block. So it's a barrier we keep on coming up against, but the price of electricity can be a barrier to implementing heat pumps. So the third enabler, as with electricity, is that treating energy as a system is a real enabler. So part of what you can do to remove that spark gap is by combining a heat pump with renewable electricity, such as wind as a community, or you could introduce kind of thermal storage vessels, access overnight tariffs that are cheaper. So yeah, treating this as a system can help lower the barriers to installing heat pumps. However, that barrier, corresponding barrier number 3, is the complex regulation. So particularly if you're looking at kind of large-scale communal heating systems, you quite rightly have some strict regulation and licensing requirements. So this can be a block for a community group. That can be quite a challenging area to navigate. Definitely do it, but it is a barrier. So the fourth enabler is the economies of scale. So by delivering a heat solution at a neighbourhood level, you can reduce those overall costs and help speed up the energy transition rather than waiting for individual households to be installing heat pumps. However, barrier number 4 is that particularly large-scale solutions like a heat network, they do cause a fair amount of disruption, such as installing the network, pipe work, installing an energy centre. So there can be some resident disruption there that needs to be managed by the community group. The final enabler, and this is more looking at what communities can do to provide advice and kind of enabling services, is that when it comes to delivering local information, research has shown that basically the more local the organisation is that's offering advice, the more trusted that information is. So yeah, I think we've got an age of disinformation and a lot of bubbles. And what community groups and local organisations do is can really provide a trusted source of information, even if it's a way of facilitating between other experts. If it's coming from the local community, that can really help punch through. So that's a core enabler here. However, the final barrier is quite challenging to influence individual homeowner decisions. So particularly if you're looking at individual homes or individual businesses, this isn't the purview of a community group. So therefore, kind of heat solutions quite often receive them as the community taking more of an enabling role rather than actually delivering the heat. So yeah, that's a core barrier. Is kind of how much impact can the community actually have. Okay, so let's talk through some business models or business cases. So these 6 bubbles are each of the considerations that a community would have when delivering kind of communal heat supply, such as through a heat network. And I'm going to go through each of these in turn and kind of talk through what the considerations are when you're building your business model here. Okay, so let's start with the top bubble, ownership and governance. So this is a decision that does involve, as I said earlier, this trade-off between control and risk. So whether you go down the role of community ownership, whether that's via an ESCO, or are you going to dilute that control by going into shared ownership or third-party ownership? So firstly, that community ownership option, the community ESCO. So as I said earlier, an ESCO, an energy services company, would be set up to install, own and operate energy infrastructure. So that could be a heat pump or it could be energy efficiency. But the focus for the community here would be on reducing energy costs or supplying useful heat. So in this situation, the community would have full control, but would also take on quite a lot of risk, albeit you could mitigate that risk by kind of outsourcing services. So kind of there would be an external provider that would be installing and operating. But the alternative, particularly for large scale communal heat, would be looking at a shared ownership model. So that could be in partnership with a local authority or housing association or kind of any kind of commercial developers or partners. So this would spread the risk and also give you that access to the skills and in some cases the capital. But the drawback for that is you might see reduced customer bill savings. There might not be as big a benefit for the end user, the householders. And finally, that third party ownership. So here we're looking at a model that would transfer all the risk in the operation to an external provider. So in this case, the community might develop the concept, do the feasibility study, but then pass the project on to a developer that can actually take it forward. Moving to the next bubble, so operation and delivery. So this is quite closely linked to this ownership question. And ultimately, it is about who has responsibility for what can be quite a complex operation. So there are multiple stakeholders, there are strict regulations. And these regulations, so there's metering and billing regulations that mean that customers need to fully understand their costs. There needs to be transparent billing. And especially in heat networks, you can only have one single supplier. So that means you really need some safeguards to protect the individual customers who are connected to that, because they can't switch. There is just one supplier. And then community participation is really important to be able to safeguard. So this could be done via advisory panels and kind of building up transparency in the process as much as possible. So this community participation is obviously going to be the case when there's fully community ownership, but in shared ownership or third party, it's really important to advocate for this participation of the community, because it's a long-term scheme. It needs to make sure that customers are protected. Finally, on that operation front is the construction and disturbance of that process. Each property would typically need a heat interface unit that needs to be installed, and there is a question of who pays for that. So is it the developer? Is that paid for via the connection costs, or is the individual household going to pay those for those upgrades? So this is a question for the operation and delivery stage. Moving on to our next couple of bubbles. So first of all, let's look at customers and users, the one on the bottom left. So as part of the technical design process, you will be identifying who your end customers are. Is it households that are using it for the heating? Is it public buildings? So networks work best in really high density housing areas or high density demand. And because you've got those clusters, that reduces the cost of building out the network. And also, as I mentioned earlier, at anchor loads, these are really particularly important in heat networks because you need that reliable demand that's going to be providing you with your revenue. Onto the finance sources. So we've gone through these sources before. It's similar to electricity generation. There are more extensive grant opportunities for heat networks. So the Green Heat Network Fund can fund up to 50% of construction costs. And if for the public sector, there's also a decarbonisation scheme that helps with the funds. Community investment, so community share raises is also a good option here. But you can also look at more commercial options, particularly because heat networks can be extremely expensive. So if you're looking at those higher sums of money that you need to raise, you may well be looking at commercial finance. Okay, so let's look at the next bubble. So this is tariffs and revenue. So this is how are customers actually going to pay for the heat that they're using. So it's usually made up of a standing charge, and you'll set this at a rate that covers your operating costs. And then the unit cost of heat, so pounds per kilowatt hour. And that's what's going to cover the actual energy delivered. Now, by far the most challenging aspect of delivering a heat network with a viable business model is how do you set these tariffs at a rate which is covering your costs, while also actually being affordable for the customers. So as I said earlier, that spark gap, that current fourfold difference in price between electricity and fossil fuels, really needs to narrow for people to be able to then clearly benefit from switching over to the heat network. So in your cash flow and in your business plan, you need to make sure that, yeah, both the tariffs are both covering your costs, but also is this actually going to be incentivizing people to switch? Then there's also a question of fairness here. So as a community, you might be thinking, should standing charges be the same for all customers? Should a small household be paying the same as a large one? Should you be offering any reduced rates for certain groups? So these are all some of the considerations that you'd be making at this point. And finally, ending with the general business model. So that's typically going to be energy supply contracts. So there's a contract between you and the end customer that you're going to deliver heat energy. And then you're going to be getting kind of long-term revenue from that. So at the moment, it is very hard for a community group to make the business model stack up for heat networks. And the fundamental reason for that is the cost of electricity. But if you're able to design it as a system, so co-locate with wind power to reduce your electricity costs, or including thermal storage vessels or flexible tariffs, you can find a way by treating that more kind of holistically of finding a way to make things work. So yeah, treating energy as a system is a really core part of getting a community heat network off the ground. Okay, that was a very quick tour of the business models of heat networks. So let's move on to energy efficiency, which is often called retrofit. So retrofit is when you are making upgrades to an existing property to make it energy efficient. You're retrofitting it. So again, we'll start with the policy and regulatory context. So minimum energy efficiency standards. So these are UK regulations that set a minimum energy performance, and this is for private rented properties. So far we've been looking a bit more at homeowners. This is for private rents. So this was the case that each private renter must have a energy performance certificate, which is the certificate you get when you buy or sell a house that tells you its energy performance. So the target was that it had to be E or above, but this is set to be increased to make sure it's C or above by 2030. And that legislation is currently under consultation, but that's likely to come through. And the goal here of these minimum efficiency standards are to reduce bills for tenants, because otherwise kind of tenants have very little control over the energy performance of the buildings that they live in, because they can't be installing measures themselves. So what these standards do is try and ensure that tenants have livable properties. I would say that an EPC of E is pretty low, so increasing that to C, I think, will help. Next, the energy company obligations. So this is ECO. So you might see this referred to as ECO 4, because it's on its 4th iteration now. And what this obligation is energy suppliers need to fund energy efficiency improvements in low-income households. So this is particularly of relevance to community groups, because one way you might support residents is by helping identify whether they're eligible for grants and support, and also helping them navigate the process, because it can be a lengthy process. With ECO funding as well, so community groups could liaise with local authorities. Local authorities have the ability to make a referral for residents that they deem to be in fuel poverty. So by forming those connections, you can help local people take advantage of ECO 4, these kind of grant supports to upgrade home heating and energy efficiency. Okay, so those first two cover tenants and low-income households. Then looking at public sector buildings, so the public sector decarbonisation scheme provides grants, so for schools, for hospitals, kind of council buildings. Yep, Russell?
Yeah, I thought I'd heard that the public sector decarbonisation scheme has been halted, so there's no more applications into that.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I think, well, as with most governments, they promised a replacement, but nothing's been announced yet, I think.
Okay, thanks for highlighting it, Russell. Okay, let's move on to the Future Home Standard then. So this is set to be introduced later this year. and what this legislation would do is require any new builds to produce 75% fewer emissions than what the 2013 standards are. So that would mean that any future homes are net zero ready. So this would be quite ambitious if it comes through. As always, the proof will be in the pudding, like what the details are. But this is future legislation to make sure that new homes are very energy efficient. Okay, let's go through once again the enablers and the barriers for energy efficiency. So again, we're going to look through these in pairs rather than one list and then another. So the first enabler for kind of community retrofit or community approaches to energy efficiency improvements is that by improving energy efficiency, you have a direct impact on people's bills. So this is the clearest incentive for action, that there's actual bill savings at the end of it. That corresponding barrier is the costs. So for many households, that upfront investment might be too much, and also there's a cost in terms of disruption. So some measures, kind of like loft insulation or draft proofing, things like that, they're relatively low cost and quite quick to implement. But some other measures can be a bit more costly, they can be a bit more disruptive. So that's certainly a barrier for folks. The second enabler is the health and well-being co-benefits. So by improving the efficiency, you're not only cutting bills, you're improving the comfort of the home. If it's done properly, you're improving the air quality. You're reducing fuel poverty. By increasing energy efficiency, you might actually be encouraging people to heat their homes more, get it to more of a comfortable temperature. So the barrier, however, is that there isn't any one-size-fits-all policy or solution. So every home will have a different need, different interventions, and so that does make it quite hard to be giving simple, generalizable advice. It tends to need to be a bit more one-on-one or a bit more specified. So the third enabler is that there are grants particularly for low-income households. So these grants do reduce the financial barrier. As I said before, there's still that administrative barrier that can actually be a real block. So the application processes can take some time. Also, sometimes the homeowner might still have to pay up front and then be refunded with the grant. And so what communities can do is reduce that barrier by kind of guiding people through the process. Where am I at? The fourth enabler. So that fourth enabler is that the community, as I said earlier, is a really trusted body, local body. And so these community groups can be well placed to be intermediaries. So bridging that gap between the residents on one hand and then the local authorities on the other, and energy advisors, energy suppliers, all these external bodies. By being a facilitator, the community can help, for example, energy advisors or energy advice services actually get to the places where they need to go. However, the barrier is, so how can a community actually go beyond that facilitation role? Actively delivering the retrofit services does take some technical experience, some expertise. So again, this is a barrier that a community is going to get up against. How do you go beyond being simply a facilitator? So the fifth enabler is the partnership with local authorities. So local authorities will likely have a local energy efficiency plan, which in most cases will be aligned with what the community is wanting to do. And so there can be opportunities for partnership there. There is an alignment of goals if you can talk to the right people. However, one of the barriers that we see in energy efficiency is in mixed housing blocks where you've got split ownership or different decision making. So for example, I'm in a block of flats and we've got a mix of social tenants, private tenants, homeowners, and so that means it can be difficult to get approval from everyone for any retrofit work. So that coordination can be a real challenge. So those are kind of the rundown of the enablers and barriers in the energy efficiency space. So let's look at three different business models for how community groups can actually take action on energy efficiency. So I'm going to do this through three case studies. So the first business model I'm calling Retrofit as a Service, and Brighton and Hove Energy Services Cooperative. This is the case study. And in this case, the community would be using energy service agreements to actively deliver a range of energy efficiency upgrades directly to homeowners. So this cooperative is actively installing upgrades. Let's look at the customer benefit. So in this particular business model, the homeowner would receive an energy appraisal and a low carbon plan, and that would set out kind of the expected costs of some recommended measures, what the carbon savings are going to be, and then the customer gets to decide which measure they would like installed and do not pay any upfront costs. So the revenue stream for Brighton, the cooperative, is that revenue comes from a pay-as-you-save model. So the repayments are taken from a homeowner as a share of their energy bill savings. So for example, we've identified by installing a loft insulation, you've saved £100. You keep £50 of it, and we will receive £50 back. And then over the course of the lifetime, the energy savings will be. Is that a question from Cara? What happens if the homeowner changes hands? It's a good question, actually. I'd need to look into the specifics of how Brighton do it. I imagine you'd have a couple of models. One would be an exit fee, another would be a condition of sale. I imagine they'd probably go down the exit fee route in your contract. But yeah, that would be one of the details that you'd have to would have to think about. So in terms of ownership, that ownership and operation, so the co-op is retaining the ownership of the system. So if they're installing a heat pump, they are owning that until the homeowner has repaid. But that means they also maintain them for the duration of the term. So it's ensuring that long-term performance. And then at the end of the contract length, all of the bill savings that the homeowner is getting from the upgrade is going to be retained by that homeowner. So the funding model is the community share raise. So this is a kind of rolling community share raise they have. It's quite a big scheme, and they do other services as well as this. And so what this does is it allows local residents to actually invest and support the project. And they've been really successful in raising finance here. So the main partners are the independent installers. So the cooperative is contracting these installers to do the measures, and by that repeat business can help ensure quality. You've got some trusted partners that you know are delivering a low cost and high quality service because you're able to give them that repeat business. So I think this model works really well by combining that community investment as well as having a long-term revenue stream. So you're balancing those two things, and you're making most of the trust of a local organisation. You're not going to any old big supplier. You've built trust by neighbours seeing other people go through the scheme. The drawback is obviously it takes quite a lot of organisational capacity. So this might be something that you go on to as a final phase of energy efficiency programmes. But it's certainly proof that a community can be installing upgrades. Okay, so the second model is a community delivery service. And so the case study here is Climate Action Straven. So this is a community group in Lanarkshire in Scotland. And they started by targeting a single housing type. So they identified kind of 60s and 70s bungalows were a particularly common housing type in their area. And then they developed quite a simple retrofit design for loft insulation, so just loft insulation. And by choosing that sole intervention, they're able to offer customers a kind of clear benefit at a relatively low cost by developing those economies of scale that had their predictability that most of these housing types need this particular intervention, and we can do it at low cost. So that customer benefit was clear. So because the Climate Action Straven Group were working on many similar homes in bulk, they achieved those economies of scale and were able to implement or install at lower cost than others. They also provided guidance for householders. They've set up an energy advice hub in the town where people can come to ask about their particular property. So the revenue stream, so it's a no profit pricing model. So the homeowners are paying on installation. So the householders are paying on installation, but it's at a no profit rate. So the Climate Action Straven are able to undercut competitors by not taking any profits for themselves. So they're obviously setting this price at a break-even point to make sure that they can cover their costs. So ownership and operation. So in this model, unlike Brighton, the homeowners are retaining ownership of the measures. They're paying for them upfront and therefore retain the full benefit from the energy bill savings that they're getting. The initial funding for the scheme, so it actually came from relatively small grants, charitable grants, and that was the grants were used to develop the retrofit designs, to identify the housing types and particular measures, and also to set up that advice hub. But then after that, the program's operating on a self-sufficient basis. So the partners, so this business model does rely on a level of expertise within the community, or an ability to partner with expert partners. So in Climate Action Straven's case, they have the retrofit installers on staff as part of the community that are motivated to deliver this. So I think this example is also a really good example of how, if you're limited by limiting down that scope, by just focusing on one particular measure in one particular house, you can have the capacity to, as a community, to actually deliver some energy efficiency improvements. Otherwise, I think the idea of retrofit on all the different house types, all the different measures that you can implement, can be a bit overwhelming. So this is a really good way of targeting in on one way that the community can make a difference. So the third and final model, I would call a community facilitator role. This can be more manageable for smaller groups, or perhaps as a first phase of action before then moving on to other areas. And the example here is bigger area climate care. So they do not install any energy efficiency measures or deliver retrofit themselves. So instead, they do act as that local enabler. So they provided free home energy assessments for residents. So they started with 24 pilot homes, and the customer benefits quite clearly. So these pilot homes receive a free energy audit, a free rundown of the recommended low carbon measures for their homes, also a kind of estimate of what the cost would be, what the savings would be. But then the benefit is wider than that across the area, because from these pilot homes, you can mock up some case studies that can be published and shared, so that people with similar housing types to those that are part of the pilot homes can see what measures were recommended, can see the approximate costs, and then can apply that to their own property. So the revenue stream, so there was no revenue stream. The service is free, and that's because it was covered by grant funding. So it was covered by the SSE Renewables Fund. So an alternative option here would still be to use grant funding, but to offer more audits but at subsidised costs. So that would mean you could offer it around more households, but it's up to the group how they use that grant funding. And this measure could also be expanded beyond grant funding if you're able to offer lower cost energy audits than people can otherwise get on the market. So the main partner was the service provider. So obviously the community is dependent on that expert partner, and they're the ones that are delivering the energy audits. And the organisation, so going back to the ownership and operation, that was entirely volunteer-led. So it took some community capacity to get off the ground, but did rely on those volunteers. So yeah, again, I think this model shows that even if you're not installing energy efficiency upgrades yourself, the community can make a real difference, particularly with that facilitation, providing advice. You don't have to necessarily be installing things yourself. And some of the grant funding models might also go for providing regular energy cafes, as I think one of you have had experience with, or perhaps using that grant funding to provide a thermal imaging camera service. These are all examples of ways that the community can enable and inform the local people. Okay, so that covers heat and energy efficiency. It actually covers all of my my presentation slides that I'll be presenting. So now it's a case of handing back over to you guys for a roundtable discussion. From your introductions at the beginning, I understand there is quite a lot of experience on the call, people that have either at the advanced stages of getting community energy projects off the ground or having aspirations to do so. So I'd like to hand over to you guys to help learn from each other. So first of all, be thinking about what your experience is. Have you kind of worked out for yourself kind of what aspects are working, what doesn't, what would be the lessons that you'd like to share? And then moving on to aspirations, and for your particular community, what you see as those enablers and what are the barriers. So yeah, welcome to, the floor is yours if you want to share any of your experiences. Maybe put your hand up first if you want to share, and then we can go on from there. Russell, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Just something that we've come across in projects, which I think has an impact on certainly on heat networks, but also on possibly on retrofit, is and energy efficiency measures. Is we've done a lot of community engagement to try and find out what people's energy bills are, so that we can then calculate how much we can save them. And certainly in rural areas, but and also social housing areas, what we find is that the numbers they give us just don't make any sense. So we look at the size of the house, we look at the quality of the building, and then we find that their energy costs are, sometimes a half, sometimes even less than we would expect them to be. And the truth is, because the measures they are taking to lower their energy bills are things like living in 2 rooms through the whole winter, or basically, in elderly people sleeping in the kitchen because that's the hottest room. So there's 2 impacts of that. First of all, it's very difficult to make a project stack up because we can't demonstrate we're going to save money. The other problem is a lot of them don't see an issue with that. They're not complaining. They're just stating that's the way they live. What we have found is that one way around it is the property owner, which quite often is a social housing operator or a private landlord. It's really no good for the buildings either. The fact that the building is left cold for a big chunk of the year doesn't help them in the long term. So that's one way that we can get these projects done. But it has proved really difficult to prove the financial case, because we're just not going to be able to deliver the energy savings that we thought, because they've got other methods to keep the energy cost down.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. I would say across lots of different spheres, but particularly in energy, often when you make something more efficient, people use it more. And obviously, in the case of energy, that's a good thing. Perhaps heating more rooms, or being at more comfortable temperature. But yeah, you're right. If your business model is relying on those bill savings, actually people might end up with quite static bills, no matter how energy efficient they are, because they're actually taking advantage of using that heat more. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Helga?
Well, in terms of the bill saving, I think you were mentioning the 4-4 in terms of COP4 and for higher price for electricity. I understand it's really worse than that, in the sense that the average COP achieved with a heat pump is 2.65 and not 4, and the higher modern ones are unlikely to be achieved. So there's very high risk if you only do heat pump replacement without improving insulation, that the bills will go significantly up rather than staying put or even coming down. So that is a big challenge, and therefore looking at combination of significant insulation improvement with a heat pump, I think, is an essential element.
Yeah, so I mean, we typically look at a COP of around 3.2 based on the data. That's the average COP, and compared to a kind of a boiler efficiency of about 85 to 90%. That's where you get
overall national data on it says that that may be target values, but the actually achieved in recorded is 2.65. But anyway, regardless, it's lower than 4, and unless we do something like, for instance, OVO has said that you can do special metering of the electricity for your heat pump, and you'll get half price electricity for heat pump. That's also done in USA, in Boston, for example. So, and areas of getting electricity other than normal price is really part of the essential in order to break even with a heat pump installation. Thank you.
Jake?
Just to tack on to the back of that, with retrofit, going fabric first is vitally important, just because of, yes, you can put in a heat pump, and even if you get a COP of 4, you're still going to pay 3 times the amount on your electric bill compared to if you were paying a gas or an oil bill. Because unless you've got that really well thermally insulated property, the heat pump's going to have to work harder to keep the heat in. And then you end up it just costs you more and more and more and more, whereas you'd actually end up saving money if you insulate first. And that is one of the biggest challenges with getting people on board with heat pumps, is you get the horror stories, same as you did with cavity wall insulation with damp, because it wasn't done properly and they were just thrown in. Now everyone's like, oh, heat pumps cost loads to install, whereas actually they just need to be done properly.
Yeah. On that kind of fabric first approach, I tend to think that kind of if you're going to be installing energy efficiency upgrades anyway, of course you're better doing that before installing a heat pump. But in effect, the heat pump is no different to any other system. If you've got an inefficient home with a gas boiler, you're going to need quite a lot of energy, and if you then put a heat pump in, that difference in performance is still going to be similar. So we're kind of moving away from recommending fabric first. That actually the savings are going to be there comparably, whether it's an efficient home or an energy efficient home, because you're still needing to heat the home. The same amount of heat is still leaking out. You just got a different system that's using the heat.
But electric costs a hell of a lot more than gas does.
Yeah.
So even if you are heating an efficient home with gas, that's still going to cost significantly less than you are with electric. So not going fabric first is a really bad idea.
The difference between electricity and gas is the same, whether you've got an efficient home or an inefficient home, is the only thing I'd add to that. That difference is still the same.
But when it comes to cost, it's very different.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I would disagree that it's the same, because if you do fabric first, then you're able to take advantage of cheap electricity because your house will hold it. So you can, well, for my car costs a third of the cost for electricity than the rest of the time, and I can use the similar for the heat pump. But best of all is to buy all the electricity cheap, and if you got an EV, to store it in your EV and then put it back to the house during the daytime. Then you can get a factor of 9 rather than 3 in terms of a cup of 3 plus a third of the electricity price, because you get electricity at about 8 pence a unit at the night time. But if you have fabric first, then you don't worry too much about exactly when you put the heat in. Time moves out of the factor.
Yeah, thanks. Lucy, I'm aware you've had your hand up for a while. Maybe you could jump in.
I guess looking from my experience in Leeds, heat pumps really aren't the answer to a lot of houses, because we can't have them, because we've got no we've got a lot of back-to-back properties with no outside space which can't have heat pumps, basically. E.g., I live in one of them, and there's lots of them in Leeds, for example. So we're kind of, there's these massive areas of Leeds that are just not suitable for heat pumps. And what we've kind of been looking at loosely is, looking at, you're going to need like ground source loops and things like that, which obviously then you need to, is a very big upfront cost and not something that a community could really deliver. So there's big areas of Leeds where I'm just like, I don't know what to do with my own house. So I think it's just, there's so many barriers, unfortunately. I feel like, that the tradespeople, they're not being supply chain, not being like, they're not being a place where you can to get of tradespeople. So as a community, organization, I'm really scared of recommending anybody. So it's like, I don't feel like I'm in a place where I can give advice to the community, because you just don't know who to trust anymore. Or there's a very small amount of organizations that have people's best interest at heart and are really educated on the materials and things. Obviously with Awaab's law coming in as well, there's way more pressure on, with ventilation and things. And certainly from my experience of having room in the roof insulation put in through the Great British Insulation Scheme, I had to really fight to even find out what materials they were planning to put into my roof.
Yeah.
And you're not given that information, and I think that's really quite scary. And I think a lot of people have been even put off trying to make measures, changes because of that, because it's so confusing. Sorry, that's just negative. Sorry.
Karen?
I'd like to be able to help people, but I don't know how, I guess, at the moment.
Yeah. And also want to kind of steer people towards also talking about electricity generation, heat, energy efficiency, any of those. And obviously the focus being on business models and kind of building a commercial case as a community group.
Sorry.
Karen?
Yes. Just to say, it is complicated. There isn't one simple solution, as we've all kind of discussed about different options. It depends on the house and the people. There's a lot of discussion around not putting fabric first, particularly in areas of high conservation. Almost impossible to do retrofit in those areas. So again, if we're focused on decarbonisation, affordable energy, then looking at community energy is one way to address that. And also looking at ways that maybe creating virtual power plants, so supporting individuals getting PV and batteries in their homes to then kind of share that in a way that makes it much more cost effective. And we need to lobby and campaign, because it's not fair that gas is so much cheaper when its impact is so much worse than electricity. So I totally agree with you that in order to make it really fair in terms of switching to decarbonised heat sources particularly, then it needs to be a fairer kind of saving platform. We down in the southwest are looking to really, of course, support those who are off the gas grid, which I know some of the grants are really focusing on that as well, because that's where they're more likely to make some cost savings switching to a heat pump. But there are a variety of solutions, and again, looking at what's most appropriate for that property. It's why retrofit is quite challenging, on top of the fact that we are lacking skills and resources for different types of old properties. That so many of the people that are suffering from kind of fuel poverty, even though they don't come into that low income bracket, are kind of suffering from. So it's great to see these different schemes going around the country to kind of find ways that do work, but there is no silver bullet. And I guess that's why this is so challenging, is that each option will be unique per property. And depends on what the focus point is for the output. Where you can retrofit fabric first, of course, it's important mostly as well for health and well-being, as we've noticed, having to improve ventilation as well as insulation must go together, or otherwise you end up with mouldy homes. So that's me adding to that one.
Thanks. Jake?
With regards to all of that, that's why they've introduced and are following the PAS 2035 framework, which is a whole house approach to retrofit instead of just throwing in heat pumps, etc. It's a framework.
But only for funded schemes. You don't have to follow that as an individual who isn't using government grant. So there's already that kind of mixed delivery there.
I didn't know that. I thought it was across the board.
Does anyone have any experiences they'd like to share about kind of community energy generation projects, or any kind of community energy projects you have got off the ground, and what's worked, what you found challenging? Kara?
So we were one of many early adopters of community energy when the feed-in tariff existed. So that obviously meant that you got a guaranteed income generation for every kilowatt, enabling smaller scale schemes to go forward. So we did a number of rooftops for schools in smaller industry, but as noted, industry can change and that becomes challenges with the occupier. Without the feed-in tariff, scale is becoming very difficult, so we need to go big now. And then, of course, we're coming against potential grid constraints. And we'd still like to do schools, because there are opportunities, particularly with more kind of a donation front, where people want to support decarbonisation communities. But many councillors, through the the Treasury now are kind of quibbling over whether that is seen as grant and has issues on the kind of finances. So I guess my point is, it is frustrating when the kind of opportunities that support delivery get moved, because then it puts us in a bit of a difficult ability to continue. But then on the other side, particularly engaging with Clean Power Plan for 2030, suggestions that there will be grants and support for councils and communities to deliver in collaboration, means that perhaps we will get more support again to go forward, and on scale perhaps uniting across several community energy groups that already exist in an area may be a good idea. I guess the challenge of the longevity of these groups, as we know, we're looking at several decades of having these schemes in place. How do we keep the momentum and the support when we're mostly volunteers? And that does cause me some slight anxiety that we are responsible for investors' money, and if who's going to help us deliver that in the future, and some of us are too old to do that. So that's something that's
Thanks for that, Karen. Helga?
Yeah, well, two things. First of all, the heat networks. We had a feasibility study on a heat network and found that the cost per household was just ridiculously high, and therefore no chance, forget it. But in context of back to the retrofit, there is a report, Retrofit at Scale, which is trying to get down the main household cost from about 60 to 70,000, the highest level about 75,000 pounds for doing a Enofit, the highest level of retrofit, down to about 19,000-20,000 by excluding all work that would disturb the house in terms of building sense or wiring sense. And in that sense, they get the house up to a level which makes it economically feasible to do a heat pump. So, and it's a very, very practical report, but it's a 190-page report that came out last year, which covers a lot of this area, but still very challenging. And I think some of the measures in there that really cuts things down relies upon manufacturing being of new units that fit into like the space of the gas boiler, and therefore nothing is disturbed, plus a small hot water tank and such issues which are available on the continent but not necessarily available here. So with a bit of development in that area, then costs come down, but down to from about 60, 70 to 20,000, and not 10,000, which the heat pump alone is going to do. Because to me, the heat pump alone is going to give higher rather than lower energy costs, unless the government actually does what it ought to do, which is change the bias between gas price and electricity price. Thank you.
Thanks, Holger. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Maybe pick out one of these four bullet points, kind of applying it to your own local community. Anyone else have any thoughts? Okay, maybe to kind of close and say, obviously this is the fifth of the 5 workshops, so no more incoming. But if you've missed any of them, the recordings I believe will be made available on the website for you to look back, and hopefully they can be a useful resource for you. Also to say that individual support for community groups is available on a one-to-one basis. So if you visit the North Eastern Yorkshire Hub website, there are sign-up slots available, and that's with the consultants here at SEAM. So we're happy to give you any kind of individual support or kind of help develop projects and ideas with projects. So finally, myself and Sandy and Ahmed, I believe, will remain on the call. If you've got any questions or anything else further that you want to talk about. But otherwise, just thank you for attending. Thank you for all your participation. And yeah, I really hope this series of workshops have been useful for you. So thanks, and best of luck with all of the projects that you might have going on in your local communities. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. Where was
Yeah, thank you.
the videos? Is that on the Net Zero Hub website somewhere, or?
Ahmad, you've had point of contact with the hub. Are you aware of where the recordings are, or if they're been uploaded
Yes.
yet?
The videos will be uploaded to the hub's website before long. So very soon, we'll let you know when they'll be uploaded.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's perfect.
Great.
No worries.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Anne. Bye.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Can I just say, Ross and Ahmad, the workshops have been really brilliant, helped me enormously. Thank you very much, and I will make reference to your folders that you've been sending. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Fiona.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Cheers.
Let me just finish the recording now.
Yep. Well done, Ross.
Cheers.